Maybe you aren't too excited about watching a movie about insects. Maybe insects freak you out a little. Don't worry. Once you know more about insects, you will see them in a different light. This movie will teach you all about some common insects and why they are important. The first reason insects are very important is pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen between flowers, which allows the flowers to reproduce. This is often done by insects. To get nectar from these flowers, an insect must stand on them. This means its feet will be coated in pollen that it will deliver to the next plant. These plants have many small flowers on top of one another. When an insect lands on any blossom, the stamens underneath will rub pollen on the insect. This flower is evolved to deposit pollen onto any insect that lands. It has several protruding nectaries to attract insects, and the rest of the flower is covered in stamens that are transferring pollen to the feet of this bee. To conclude, this video shows that plants have different strategies to use pollinators, but they all are in order to reproduce. Now, let's see what else is so interesting about insects.
Many different insects with major or minor differences with their life cycles. But there are only two different kinds of life cycles: complete metamorphosis and incomplete metamorphosis. An example of a complete metamorphosis is the life cycle of a milkweed tussock moth, which goes through 4 stages: egg stage, larval stage, pupal stage, and the adult stage. The larva, a caterpillar, eats milkweed leaves and older shoots as it grows. This stage lasts about a month. An example of an incomplete metamorphosis is the life cycle of a buffalo treehopper, which goes through 3 stages, called the egg stage, nymph stage, and the adult stage. The adult buffalo treehopper has a sharp ovipositor she uses to cut slits in the trees with. These slits keep her eggs warm until they hatch. This stage lasts about a month and a half while it sips syrup from the goldenrod, clover, and aster for food. Now, we are going to show the physical adaptation of insects.
All insects have a head, thorax, abdomen, and 6 jointed legs. Many insects can share the same habitat because each kind of insect has different physical adaptations. Let's look at legs, for example. All insect legs have femurs and tibias. However, they are different for each insect. For example, the hind leg of a June bug has a strong femur to help it climb. The color is dark to help it blend in with the bark of the tree. On this bumblebee's tibia, there are special hairs to help it shed water on wet days. It also has a longer tarsus on the front leg to help it dig for nectar. Insect adaptations develop over time. Different generations adapt to changing environment, but slowly. Insects also adapt to the plants in their habitats. Insects can be very picky. They only use certain plants for food and shelter.
Every animal's food comes from plants at some point, either by eating plants or by eating organisms that have eaten plants. The group of animals that is best at passing energy from plants to the animals that cannot eat plants is insects. This is why insects are such a necessary part of a healthy ecosystem. Animals such as spiders, reptiles, amphibians, rodents, and birds all depend on insects for food. Removing insects from an ecosystem may destroy that ecosystem. Also, many insects have evolved to digest only the chemicals in specific native plants.
Native plants have been here so long that they are a big part of the ecosystem. Invasive plants, on the other hand, are plants that have been introduced recently and have a negative impact on the ecosystem. Humans have built cities, suburbs, and farms on 95% of the land in America. If we plant native plants in our yard, we can return some space to the insects and other species that need it.
We can bring back the biodiversity that makes ecosystems thrive. In addition to lack of habitat, another challenge insects face is climate change.
Think, what would happen if all insects died? Climate change is caused in many ways from us humans. Some things we do to make climate change worse include driving cars that produce carbon dioxide, littering, and many other things. The pollution from cars, factories, and other motorized objects trap the heat in the Earth's atmosphere. Because the gas traps the heat instead of the heat leaving the atmosphere, this is called the greenhouse effect. Plants and insects are affected by climate change. For example, milkweed gives insects nectar, which makes pollination happen, which makes food for other animals. The milkweed needs a temperature not too hot or too cold in order to reproduce and stay alive. If it is too hot, then the milkweed will dry up. Some insects eat the milkweed to stay alive. For example, the milkweed tussock moth eats the leaves and shoots from the milkweed. And if the milkweed is dried up, then the milkweed tussock moth and other insects that feast on the milkweed will die. And sometimes moths come out in the dark and pollinate flowers, so if the milkweed tussock moth died, some flowers will also die with it. It needs pollination, and the plants and insects all die and go extinct. While June bugs are not directly impacted by climate change, however, the white oak trees are more sensitive to climate change. Without the white oak tree, the June bug won't have a place to hide from predators. The difference of the problems that affect the milkweed tussock moth and the June bug, because of climate change, June bugs won't actually die. They don't use just the white oak tree for shelter and food. They also use other trees like the balsam fir tree and bushes. The milkweed is the milkweed tussock moth's main source of food, and if that dies by climate change, they'll starve.
Humans cannot survive on their own without any other species, because insects have a job, which is to pollinate and help flowers. If there are no insects, those plants will die and so are our food. Fortunately, there are easy ways to solve this. Plant native flowers or other plants for insects to pollinate. Do not rake up leaves. Give the insects that material to protect themselves for winter. Do not use pesticides to get rid of insects, because the chemical kills other species that we need. Instead, you can use beneficial insects to control pests.